and welcome to EBC Learning Interviews. Today with us we have Professor Dr. Yugank Goyal. Yugank is a faculty at Flame University. Yugank has been involved in setting up of various higher education institutions. He is involved in public policy, regulations, and various law and development programs. Today, Yugank is with us and he'll be talking about implementation challenges and suggestions on National Education Policy 2020. So, Yugank, welcome to the interview.
Well, thank you so much, Pradyumna. It's a pleasure to be here. But, to the audience, I must say at the outset that these are really just initial thoughts in my engagement with higher education institutions. This is just a policy yet. There is no law, so to speak. So nothing that I will mention must be construed as a legal advice, right? These are some of the suggestions. And I think this is an ongoing conversation. These ideas will evolve. These ideas will evolve even for me. But I think it's important that we at least set out some preliminary ideas on the table. But, individual institutions must do their own due diligence before following the ideas that we discuss in the panel. But thanks a lot for inviting me.
So, Yugank, there is a lot of anxiety amongst higher education institutions. They really don't know what needs to be implemented and how that needs to be implemented. Do you think this anxiety is justified?
Well, yes and no. I think in one word or in one phrase, if I have to surmise what NEP really asks us to do, is that it wants us to take learning seriously. Educational institutions that have never taken learning seriously, of course, they will be anxious because now they have to. But on the other hand, there are many universities and colleges and other higher education institutions that have been doing or making significantly sincere efforts in achieving learning outcomes and also research outcomes. They don't necessarily need to be anxious. I think this anxiety is largely a result of partly the fact that institutions have not been engaged in learning seriously, but also partly because there's a lot of discussion on NEP's overall goals, but there is very little discourse on what can institutions do to implement NEP. And so lack of that discourse and a history of using higher education institutions as a means to do many things except learning often probably leads to this. So I think learning is central here.
So that's right, Yugank, but let us take a step back from teaching learning as a process. But imagine if I am a registrar or a compliance officer or a vice chancellor of a university. What does it mean to me? How do I change things? What all needs to be implemented in practice?
Right. No, I think this is great. And this is really the crux of the problem. And let's try to unpack this, exactly this question through this conversation. You see, as a university administrator, in most cases, not all, the university administrators are in general inclined to follow certain laws or instructions that are given to them by the government, right? So this is what you have to do, this is what you can't do, and so on and so forth. NEP doesn't tell you this. It tells you what you should aspire for, what you should be achieving. And so it's an outcome-driven document in some ways. And therefore, many of these university administrators are at a loss to figure out what are the steps we take in order to achieve this, or what are the steps that are expected in the NEP. So let's try to unbundle many of these things. Because in my view, universities, perhaps definitely the good ones, they don't need to be anxious about it. They're already doing many things that are written in the NEP. I think one of the reasons for NEP to exist is to articulate in a very, very specific manner, this is what we want our universities to be like, rather than having this vague idea that earlier existed. So this is like, bringing a lot of, crystallizing some of these ideas together. And I'm happy to take some of these specific points in terms of what has to be done. If I'm the registrar of a university, what should I be doing here in order to achieve it?
So essentially, are you saying that the structure of academic governance need to change and more learning should be
not only. So academic governance is only one part of NEP. And I think for the benefit of our viewers, we should mention that this is a conversation only on higher education of NEP and not school education, because that's an area that I work on. But governance is only one part of it, definitely an important part. But there are many other aspects, learning being one of them. Then there are areas related to multidisciplinarity, areas related to holistic education, areas related to credit structures, flexibilities, and so on and so forth. And let's sort of pick them over time, one by one.
Right. So let's jump onto the specifics and come to the text. So one of the things that you already mentioned is multidisciplinarity. Can you explain to our viewers that what it is and how it needs to be implemented?
Yeah, so the first question is an easy one, even though often misunderstood. So let me tell you, let me try to sort of give a picture of what multidisciplinarity is. So, scholars and professionals often use the word multidisciplinarity, interdisciplinarity, and transdisciplinarity, often interchangeably, but they should not be. In general, a multidisciplinary education means that somebody who's studying physics is also studying painting. So these are two separate subjects, but the student is exposed to learning of two different disciplines in the same university, right? Even though I'm doing a degree in economics, I'm also studying history, right? So that is multidisciplinarity. But let's say if I have to do a course on, let's say, legal history, or I have to do a course on law and economics, or area studies, right? South Asian studies. In here, I am bringing concepts from both law and economics, sometimes even from sociology, history. This is interdisciplinarity, right? So you're using concepts of two different disciplines to create a new discipline. Transdisciplinarity, which is of course not mentioned in NEP, and I don't think we should go there, but for the sake of it, I should also mention, transdisciplinarity is another level where two disciplines sort of get fused to each other. So think about, for instance, bioinformatics, right? Bioengineering or sustainability, right? So you cannot have, both disciplines are equally important to understand something else, which is the third one, right? You need biology and technology to understand bioinformatics, which is the third. So this is transdisciplinarity, which is kind of the way of the future. But in the context of NEP, multidisciplinarity is that your higher education institution cannot be providing just one particular type of pedagogical intervention. It cannot be giving degrees. It cannot be delivering classes in one discipline alone. You have to give classes in several disciplines. And of course, NEP has given many examples. Which brings me to the second point, which is how do you make it? How do you make, I don't think it's very difficult to think about it now that I've explained it, right? So you have an engineering college. Well, you should have courses on history, on painting, on sculpture, in addition, on law, and I think that's extremely important, in addition to having courses in engineering. So there has to be, and it cannot really replace engineering courses, but students who are studying engineering cannot not study other disciplines too. So over time, the expectation is until 2030 that colleges or universities that are offering programs in specific disciplines must also offer programs in or subjects and courses in many other disciplines. That makes them multidisciplinary, right? So IIMs, they are providing management education. IITs are only providing technical education, but now many IITs have begun offering social science courses. So that is a step towards multidisciplinarity. So think of a registrar or a vice chancellor that you were earlier proposing, who is a vice chancellor of a law university. Well, now you will have to teach a little bit of physics. You will have to teach a little bit of mathematics. You will also have to teach a little bit of, sculpting perhaps. And this allows many other disciplines to flourish. So it's not that law is being replaced, but there are many other disciplines. And these disciplines allow the university space to become multidisciplinary. How do you go about it? Let's start, and this is something in which NEP is also very explicit. Let us start with those subjects which are closest to your central subject. So if you have an engineering college, the way to move towards a multidisciplinary engineering college is to start a course in history of nuclear physics in India, history of engineering colleges, engineering in India. Then maybe you move to science and technology studies. You move to science and society. You move to perhaps economics of various science programs, economics of space research programs in India, for example, right? Then you move towards economics itself. Then from there you can move to economics of town planning. So these are connected to engineering. You move to architecture, right? And then you move to something very different, let's say painting or philosophy. Philosophy of science is another subject, right? Sociology of science.
Right.
So let's move to other disciplines, other courses, which are closely related to your main one. Start opening courses in that, not degrees, but courses. So there are courses on philosophy of science available in engineering college. And this slowly it becomes a department, then it becomes a school, and it becomes a multidisciplinary university by 2030.
Right. Point taken, Yugank, but let us see the present higher educational institutes in India. So there are affiliated colleges, there are universities, or as you say, some IITs offering now social science courses, etc. Right? So within the present hierarchy or the system of higher education, and if all of the colleges are expected to go multidisciplinary, how will that come into place?
So let me pour some of my thoughts in this. Okay, and I've thought about it considerably. So let's categorize institutions in India, right? So you make two big categories like public institutions and private higher education institutions. Within private, you have, like you mentioned, right, autonomous colleges, affiliated colleges, and then there are of course private universities. There are private institutions. NEP proposes that there will be nothing called affiliating college in future, which means any college which is affiliated to a university will cease to exist. You cannot have affiliations done, which in practice means that these colleges will have to merge with a large university. Now, this might suddenly occur to many institutions as a big sort of existential threat, right? But that is not what's going on. What's really going on is, so if you look at, let's say, the American model. So American universities, so think about, I don't know, Harvard University, right? It has Harvard Law School, Harvard Business School, Harvard School of Art and Sciences, and so on and so forth. So you have these several schools that are part of a university. The degree comes from the university. These schools are smaller brackets, or let's say, smaller categories under a larger category of a university. This is what NEP is proposing. So you cannot have small universities anymore or small colleges. You have to have large multidisciplinary university, and the number is around 3,000. So, if your number is smaller than 3,000, the hope is that universities will become larger and reap the benefits and gains from collective wisdom of so many people and different kinds of disciplines, and also economies of scale.
Right there, I just want to interject and ask about that. What is exactly the roadmap of it? So you said about the American model where you have schools, and we have a model that a particular faculty has departments.
Departments, correct.
Right?
Correct.
So what is the road forward for present departments into becoming schools, and how the administrative structure would change? And that's where I think most of the anxiety amongst...
No, you're right. So I think you're right. Absolutely right. I think... So here's how I see it. So first of all, there is no structured roadmap that comes from some governmental department that has to be followed. It has to we have to co-evolve this. And here's one way to do it. So university structures of university can be department specific, which is like you mentioned, or they can be school specific. When you have departments, then the faculty members from these departments often take the subjects of the degree program. So these departments loan their faculty members, so to speak. In a school, you have your own faculty members. So an economist in a law school is teaching economics in a law school. I mean, of course, there are, there's considerable intellectual osmosis there. But by and large, this is what happens. Now, in my view, universities can choose either. I don't think NEP prohibits universities or pushes universities to become either school-based universities or department-based. They can choose either. The point is there should be many disciplines. So you can't have just one school or two schools. You have to have many of them. Or you can't have just one department. You'll have to have many disciplines department. You actually can have both. You can have schools and you still can have departments. And this is of course seen in many universities in India as well. The trick is that you create new disciplines in these departments to become multidisciplinary. So for instance, coming back to the point that I was making, you cannot have affiliating colleges. So this college becomes either a department or a school in an existing university, right? So there is no affiliation then. The college is run as part of a university. So NEP carves out three categories of institutions for the future. One is research intensive university, another is teaching intensive university, and the third one is degree granting autonomous colleges, right? Now, the first two categories, research intensive and teaching intensive universities, are essentially same type, except that in the first one, research and teaching is equally important. In the second one, teaching is slightly more important than research. Research takes place, right? NEP is very clear about it. But the emphasis on teaching is relatively higher. The third category, which is what probably could happen. So let's say you're talking about an autonomous college, right? So think about an autonomous college, and the college is thinking about its future. So one option is that the college becomes part of a larger university, either as a school or as a department, but offering programs, courses as part of the whole university. Another option is that it becomes a degree granting autonomous college it will only grant degrees in undergraduate education, and it will largely be a teaching institution. So the expectation of research will be rather limited from this college. So autonomous degree granting college is another category that NEP has carved out. But by and large, the hope is that all universities in India by 2030 definitely will become large multidisciplinary universities, which are either teaching intensive or research intensive.
Right. So these are three options that you suggested. Now the question is that if I am an autonomous college today, right, what factors should lead to making that decision that I want to be a teaching intensive, or if I want to be a research intensive, or let's say merge into a larger, let's say, conglomerate kind of a bigger
that's a good way to put
university.
it.
So what factors, let's say I as a let's say proprietor of an autonomous college, head of the trust which is behind that autonomous college, what are the factors on which I should make these decisions?
It's a very, very, very interesting question. And I don't know. So let me put it this way. I think the most important part is, what is your will as a promoter or as a sponsoring body of the university? Where do you see your autonomous college to go? Do you want to push the frontiers of knowledge in our society? Do you want to invest in research so that new knowledge gets created, which then contributes to nation building projects? Or do you see yourself as an instrument for offering education to vast amount? I mean, NEP proposes that we should have our enrollment rate rise significantly to 50% by 2035, which is a massive feat. So I want to take part in this nation building effort and exercise, not by doing research, but by teaching. And that's an equally laudable goal. I think the autonomous college, the faculty members, their board, and their vice chancellors and the directors and others should come together and think about where we want to go. And I think this self-reflection is one of the goals of NEP. NEP wants universities and colleges to self-reflect and try to understand, what is my place in the society? What is my place in the future? In this continuum of space-time, where do I locate myself? And I think I want to educate my children. So then I think degree granting autonomous college should be the choice. I think I want to take part in this massive industry of creation of new knowledge, pushing the frontiers of knowledge. Let me become part of a research-intensive university. You become part of research-intensive
university. Or even
university.
a translation-based university, because NEP also specifies that.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Could be a translation-based university as well. Yeah. Could be a translation. So I think. So here's the bottom line, Pradyumna. Here's the bottom line. I don't think NEP is disabling. Actually, it is enabling. It is giving you possibilities to do what you want, but it is forcing you to self-reflect. What is it that I want to do? And then there are ways in which it can be done. In fact, because it is just a policy, the way it will be done has to be shown by these colleges themselves. All these directors and vice chancellors have to come forward. They have to create new structures and evolve into the direction of NEP, and that will become the standard. In fact, I'm talking to some people evolve these structures themselves. And I think this is one of the most amazing, perhaps, I don't know whether it was intended or unintended, but the self-reflection that universities and colleges have to go through is a great consequence of NEP.
Yeah. Just to take that idea forward, by your enthusiasm and optimism, I think as we are constantly sometimes using national education policy and saying it as new education policy.
Yeah, that's a misnomer.
Yeah. So with this misnomer, do you think that we are actually entering into new age and new era of higher education where there are infinite possibilities? It is upon the stakeholders of higher education, who are the stakeholders of higher education. It is really their ambition or their wisdom that would take it forward, and not the regulatory bodies and the frameworks and whosoever decides the future of higher education. Do you think that the proprietors and the stakeholders of education are going to decide the future, or the regulators are going to decide the future? So that's a good
one. I think it's already happening, isn't it, Pradyumna? I mean, look around us. We are no longer living in a country where private university education is looked down upon, as it used to be when I went to college and schools, right? And the same would go for you. But now we have these, some of the most vibrant higher education institutions are actually private institutions in India, and that has created a separate category of their own, right? So if you look at the private universities themselves, there are very few which are doing extremely good work. Some of them, are actually very, very new. And then there are a vast number of other colleges which are largely teaching based. But many of these new institutions have started pushing people to think about private university in a different light, right? And so I think the stakeholders of education, which is those who are delivering education and those who are receiving education, so to speak, those who are in the business of research and teaching, they are actually defining the terms. I think NEP is, contrary to probably popular perception, I think it offers a lot more flexibility to higher education institutions to transform themselves if they want to. I don't think it is rigid at all. And I think that flexibility is also symbolically representing a shift in how higher education needs to be perceived in India. People who are in the business of higher education, I don't want to use the word business for this and for obvious reasons, but people who are engaging in higher education will carve out a space, will carve out a trajectory, a direction for higher education to move forward. And I think what NEP tells them to do is, listen, you choose your path, make sure you are taking learning seriously.
Right. So on that note, I mean, it would be like quite poignant to point out that on the question of quality of education generally asked about, so NEP also talks about holistic education. So
a lot of it.
Yeah. So my question is threefold. First, what is holistic education? The second, how do we look at it and how the policy document is talking about it? And third is the implementation process.
Well, thanks a lot for this. I'll answer the first. Your question is very appropriate because it's a new terminology that has been interjected into this ecosystem suddenly at such vast scale. I have never heard the word holistic education so much. As much I have in my entire life, as much I heard it in the last 1 or 2 years. And part of the reason is because people are trying to still figure out what it means. Well, so let me put it this way. I think holistic education in the way it is explained in NEP is nothing but liberal arts education, right? Now, this might not be, exactly what the framers of NEP may have in their minds, but effectively it boils down to this. Students must become responsible, creative and ethical citizens of society. And in doing responsible, creative and ethical, right? In doing so, their skills are not enough. So their education has to go beyond. It has to kind of transcend the boundaries of their disciplines. And this is how actually education is supposed to be, right? And NEP refers to our old, venerable institutions like Takshashila, Nalanda, Vikramshila and others. They were all offering holistic education. Largely talks about mingling of different types of disciplines so as to free up and open up the faculties of mind. So you do not become constrained by thoughts. Your thoughts are basically opening up the vast possibilities that your mental faculties are capable of. In practical terms, you don't study just engineering, you also study communication. You don't study just history, you also study painting. Right. You don't study just painting, you study rhetoric and debate. You don't just study rhetoric and debate, you also study value-based education. Value-based education, ethics is an important part of it. And you don't just study ethics, you study environment, you study sustainability. You also study how you are now no longer a citizen of your community, but a global citizen. How do you think in a global manner? These, the boundaries of your thinking are not constrained by the disciplines you study. So for an educational institution, STEM, for an educational institution that is focusing on STEM has to be transformed into STEAM. So it's not just science, technology, engineering, mathematics. It is science, technology, engineering, arts and mathematics. So arts and humanities become part of STEM courses. STEM courses become part of arts and humanities.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's a nice point because when you said that you summarized it into one word, holistic education means having liberal arts education. Now, there's a converse or a flip side to it as well.
Sure.
So there are universities which are non-STEM universities offering courses only in liberal arts and humanities.
Right.
Do you think let's say as a political science graduate, should take up coding or should know what string theory is all about?
So this is exactly where NEP marks a very distinct departure from the thinking of liberal arts institutions in India. So in India, liberal arts often is construed as something which is related to social science, arts and humanities. But of course, some institutions indeed, have incorporated science, STEM-based disciplines as well. So this is exactly the hope of NEP, that it's not just that STEM students will study arts and humanities. it is also that the arts and humanities or liberal arts students must study STEM courses. Now, the idea is not that you, as a political science student, must learn about string theory. The idea is not string theory to be taught to you. The idea is there is a different way of thinking about the world, which you won't study, which you won't learn, which you won't explore unless you understand string theory. So string theory is not the goal. String theory is a medium for you to open up parts of your mind which would not be opened up by probably studying political science. And so we are trying to create different types of, so we are unlocking various faculties of mind through this. And so I think, art students must study science. The levels will vary, the method and pedagogy will vary, but I think that is the hope. And I don't think it is very difficult to incorporate. In fact, people who live in India, they will perhaps even be more receptive to such an idea because, India is heterogeneous. We all come across and run into so much of heterogeneity on a daily basis that we learn through our experiences. Why not bring that heterogeneity in the classrooms also? Right, and so this is the idea of holistic education. I think it's very important that you mentioned this because chapter 11, the entire chapter is on holistic education, and one of the hopes that NEP has, and I should put it forth before I forget, is that the way liberal arts programs are constructed right now are somehow influenced by how liberal arts education has gone on in the West. But NEP hopes that we can create Indian. We can incorporate. There is something which is able to connect the students with their own communities in India. They're able to create an indigenous, so to speak, liberal arts framework or a holistic framework, and that is why they're calling it holistic. And I think that's a hope which is worth achieving.
Right. Another question that stems from here as well, the word STEM, pun intended. The idea here is that we have in this hyper specialization world where the monopoly of a particular knowledge is marketable, and we have higher education institutions which are very specific. Let's say, for example, we have law universities or forensic science universities or police universities, Raksha Shakti universities that we have in India. What about them? Do they need to add,
They will have to. And I think it's a fair point. I think they should because, like I said, human minds don't think the human minds is not disciplinarian in the way it thinks, right? So you swiftly move from, Supreme Court cases to Plato, to a tree, to this light and to this studio, to my jacket, to your green shirt. We are swiftly able to navigate across these disciplines suddenly, right? And so therefore, to constrain the minds into thinking about only one discipline is not the most advantageous thing for a mind to flourish. And so I think all of these institutions that you mentioned, which are very standalone discipline-specific institutions, will have to evolve into number of other departments or schools to become interdisciplinary. But there's time for it. It's like until 2030. But like I said, the method is start a department or a school which is closely aligned to yours. In fact, one of the ways in which operationally this could be done is that you distinguish your faculty. So I think these institutions will also have to become multidisciplinary.
So point taken, but then again, the question is of implementation. So today on ground, how do these universities start doing it? What are the most logical steps they should take?
I think a lot of it is about articulation. So I meet university and college administrators regularly, and they often tell me about the type of faculty members they have. Now, many institutions in an engineering college are actually doing communications. All that's needed by these institutions to be done is that they carve out a separate department and put these faculty members in that department, right? Or a school in which these faculty members are taken in. So you create sort of some of these disciplines within, which are all, so you have an eclectic group of faculty members, just create disciplines around them and then make your university, effectively a multidisciplinary university. You'll also have to add more people, or add more people from other disciplines and things like that. So this could be done. Your degree has to come from that school. Degree has to come from the university, but let's say in the convocation, the dean of that school is giving that degree. So that school is a separate entity from another school, and so you have two schools rather than just one, right? Or two departments, and then you have the director and so on and so forth, or the head of department. Now, your annual reports are mentioned Your annual reports carry this articulation. In fact, the spirit of NEP is that these things must be articulated in the same way. So students know that when they're going to study law, they will also have options to study something related to science. They will have options related to something to do with, fine arts and things like that.
Right.
So you can create those departments.
Yeah. No, so on the same point, I mean, it is quite axiomatic to say now that, and people have been saying this, that knowledge converges as much as you grow higher up. For example, in your case, you come from an engineering background and studying economics and then law and all of them together, right? It is the same goal that you are aspiring towards. But do you think that when we are saying that all disciplines are in sort of these distinguishing features between one discipline to another, right? They are all sort of leading towards a common convergence of knowledge. Do you think that having more disciplines would really help the knowledge society that you want to build in?
So
Just a philosophical question.
No, I think it's a good one. Let me try to answer not so philosophically then in that case. The first response is, I think it's important, partly because in India, many times people choose disciplines and choose their study trajectory, which they don't like, right? So, and so therefore there is an option, there is a possibility for them to move to another discipline because they think they are more, their attitude, their sensitivities, their aptitude is more aligned to a certain type of discipline, so they can make those choices, those moves. But second and more importantly, research has shown over time that students who have had a more interdisciplinary / multidisciplinary backgrounds back in their college or schools were able to become more, to lead or to live a more fulfilling life decades later. Now, these studies have, of course, there are all kinds of econometric studies that need to be done, or econometric, adjustments that you need to do in order to ensure that this is attributed to the multidisciplinary nature of it. But this is now becoming very, very evident. When we live in a society, we cannot just be extremely smart coders. We have to carry good communication skills. But only communication skills are also not going to take you so far. So 21st century skills require us to be able to engage in variety of thinking patterns, in a variety of engagement patterns. And 21st century is a century of collaboration. So, I think, over time, so it might just look like a little bit too much. Why am I studying all kinds of different subjects, and why am I even forced to study different types of subjects? But the whole point is, in the long run, it is going to pay off because this is how societies have advanced. If you look at Nalanda, Takshila, or Vikramshila, or all of these universities that are mentioned in the NEP as well, there were no disciplinary boundaries of the type. I mean, you would study astronomy and grammar. You would study rhetoric and painting. And so that is what led us to evolve into a society that we were, perhaps, right?
True.
And the same case goes for Bologna or Oxford and Cambridge in the UK and many other universities in the US as well. So
right. So on that note, I mean, we can safely say that what are your opinions on academic bank of credits? Because do you think that exactly what you spoke about right now, that ABC, that is the academic bank of credits, can facilitate this process, the entry and the exit points, the choice-based credit system. So all of that kind of structures that are being introduced, are they going to facilitate this entire multidisciplinary and holistic education? How much do you see this as a facilitator?
Yeah, so that's a good question as well. I think, and I think this is a very operational question, and we must be able to engage with it operationally, functionally rather. So the idea that NEP proposes is that students will have an option of exiting from the university space at the end of the first year, second year, third year, or at the end of the fourth year. If they leave at the end of first year, they get a certificate. In the end of second year, they get a diploma, then their degree. And if they leave at the end of fourth year, which is what is envisaged, that you do an undergraduate of 4 years, you leave with an honors degree or a research degree. Which means that in each of these years, the learning outcomes must be specified. So this is what the colleges and universities have to now do. They have to encourage faculty members to evolve sets of learning outcomes from each of the courses that they are delivering. So yeah, this is history and we're going to study all of this, but what is the learning outcome? And learning outcome can't be purely, we will learn about what Mughals did or what was the administration during Mauryan times. There has to be, it has to have a little bit more detail in terms of, or a more generic feature in terms of what they learn. But these learning outcomes collectively will determine that at the end of the first year, the certificate that the student receives is worth something because this person has learned something. Yeah. And that is why a choice-based credit system kicks in. So if you have a CBCS system, so let me quickly tell for the benefit of the viewers, it's nothing to be really scared of in some sense, CBCS. I mean, there is a website on the UGC, you can go to the link and you will find the courses and the different kinds of topics in each of those courses that could be offered. College administrators often ask me, how do they do it? Well, actually, these guys are already doing it without knowing that they're doing it. So you have to categorize some courses as foundational, which are compulsory for all of them to be taken. Some courses as electives, some courses as discipline-based electives, some are outside the disciplines, and so on and so forth. The only difference is that amongst the electives, there has to be an option. So for instance, the UGC template will tell you there have to be 8 courses out of which students can take 4. Well, you can have 5 courses and students can take 4 as long as there is some option, right? So you don't have to really stress around your capacity of faculty members so much. Also, and this is most interesting, Pradyumna, the CBCS framework that UGC has prescribed, universities and colleges can follow up to 70% of it. They still have room for 30% of subjects that they can choose from, which are not prescribed by the UGC. So they can choose their own subjects as long as they fulfill the criteria of core electives, disciplinary elective, and the electives outside the disciplines. So in other words, it is giving you extensive flexibility, and I don't think you need more than that, because if you're teaching history, then I think 70% of it should be history, right? Or at least 70% of the core should be on history in some ways, right? So, so I think let's look at CBCS in a very different light. Either the colleges can simply follow what UGC has prescribed, right, or they can tweak around it as long as the framework remains the same. And most colleges, whenever I look at their course syllabi, they already have enough knowledge inventory to be categorized under the heads that CBCS already offers. You now create a structure in such a way that students have an option of collecting credits, putting it in a, by the way, some of the viewers, if they don't know, there's already a regulation on ABC, Academic Bank of Credit. So as a student, I have, some of the credits earned. These credits are through my institution stored in my account in this website or in this portal somewhere, right? The institutions make these they create their own logins. And then tomorrow, and if at the end of the first year, I leave. And after 4 years or so, I think the limit there is 7 years. So after 4 years, I think now I have more time to do my education. Back in the days, I had to leave because of some problem in family or because I wanted to do some job. I can go back and now start from the second year rather than do the whole thing all over again. And my credits that are stored earlier will be adjusted for the remaining credits that I am going to be. Also, if I want to change institutions, right? So I'm studying in college A, but I don't, I think I want to go to college B after 2 years. Then college B will be able to take the credits from college A because they are stored in my ABC, in my academic bank. And so in college B, I will start with we're doing a lot of ABC, which is interesting because we're talking about education anyway. So college B is going to take those credits from that bank. And there is a website, it's fairly easy, accessible website of the Academic Bank of Credit. The institutions and students can make their login IDs, and it's fairly easy to engage with, I think.
Right. So we have touched upon various aspects and specific things in national education policy. I just want to ask about some sort of a closing comment on academic governance per se, because I believe that a lot is in the hands of the stakeholders of the education, and more on administrators and less on students perhaps. So any message that you want to communicate to them, that how they should go about them, what should be their aspirations, and how should they self-reflect with having this policy document in hand, or they should wait for the law to come in place and then think about to-dos and not to-dos. So any message for them, Yugank?
No, I think one of the messages is very clear in the NEP itself, which is that each institution will now have to have an independent board of governors. And I think this is an exercise that universities should already be engaging in. If they're not, they should start looking for people who are well-wishers of the university, but also people who can really give meaningful, practical, and long-term impactful advice to the universities and to these institutions. I think there is a lot of cross learning from one institution to another. NEP mentions about mentoring. The universities will mentor those autonomous colleges if they want to come into the fold of universities. But there is a lot of mentoring and knowledge crossovers that is required in India. So institutions, universities don't talk to each other as much as I've seen in the West. Also, institutions don't talk as much with the government or even with the industry. And I think one way to create this academic this creates this board of governors is for universities to talk to each other and learn from each other's experiences. And so this is something which is very clear already there, which I think is a good idea. But more importantly, I think NEP is indicating, like I mentioned, that universities and higher education institutions should take learning seriously, but also self-reflect and really think about their place in the world and try to implement it. My suggestion, or sort of like closing comments here, would be that in case you were already taking learning seriously, there's no anxiety in NEP at all. It needs to be re-articulated, everything that you were doing. But in case you were not, I think this is a good guiding document. In some ways, I think this is a win-win for both higher education institutions administrators, students, as well as societies. No society in the past has flourished or progressed without having excellent, responsible higher education institutions. You can look at history and tell me, and I can tell you that this is the case. I think this is the time when India really wants to usher into the space of knowledge creation, into the 21st century with pride and their head held high in the golden words of Rabindranath Tagore. And I think this is what NEP is proposing us to do. And I think if not this, then what else in this century?
Very well summed up, Yugank. So on that note, where the mind is without fear, in the words of Tagore, we are at the end of our interview today. Thank you, Yugank Goyal, for coming with us and sharing your thoughts regarding the implementation challenges and suggestions related to national education policy related to higher education in India. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Pradyumna. Thanks a lot.